Hi, everybody. It's Susan here, a little bit late to the party. I'm going to cover Saturn and ingressing Aries, and I apologize in advance for my wonky voice. It's been quite a 10-day period of real struggle with my voice and coughing and everything. Uh, I was going to record this yesterday, and I realized that I wasn't really ready to do so, so I'm doing that now. And I'm very glad that I'm actually recording today because it also ties in beautifully with Mahashivratri, which is happening overnight tonight. And Shivratri is the night of Shiva, and it does happen every month, but the Mahashivratri happens twice in the year. And this is the one that aligns with this extraordinary new moon that we're having. So it's always a night before the new moon, or Amavasya, it's known as in Hindi or Sanskrit, and that means no moon day. And this one is happening before the eclipse, which is happening already on Tuesday. So I'm recording this on Sunday, the 15th of February. I had tried to do it on the 14th, Saturn's day, on Saturday, the 14th. Um, but I just needed to rest a little bit more. So here I am. I'm going to spare you the video. So you're just looking at the chart for now. And I do have a couple of things I want to make sure I mention before I get into the Saturn ingress. And one of them is that I do have a number of videos lined up, interviews that I'm doing with people. I had to rearrange all of that because of my own, either my travels or my losing my voice. I will be tomorrow preparing a video with an extraordinary guest, a Chinese astrologer, um, who is going to explain in depth what the fire horse year is all about. And I will be um, asking questions. If you have specific questions that you want me to ask, this would be great under the comments here. Obviously, it has to be basically on Sunday, 15th. I'm giving you a very short period of time, but you can also send me an email with your questions, and I'll try and ask those questions when we meet tomorrow. So you really have a narrow window of time. I apologize for that, but I'm trying to make up for lost time. So everything's a little squished together. So that video is coming up very soon. It's the last day of the old Chinese New Year when we're doing this, and then we're going to invite in the new Chinese New Year, which is coming along with the eclipse coming on the 17th. I've done another video on that, so do please have a look at that. And then I will meet with S.J. Anderson in mid-March because I wasn't able to meet when we were supposed to a week ago. And he's taking some time away. So the next earliest time was mid-March. So we're still working on that. And then there are other people that I have lined up. So I really do hope that you enjoy those different connections and to have different points of view come in as well to my channel. I really love having conversations with people and talking, having that play and that back and forth with somebody who is really skillful is extremely inspiring for me. And before I forget, I have the early bird pricing for my courses is going to end at the end of February. It's the early bird will end for the beginner's course, the Introduction to Astrology course. And already at the eclipse is when the early bird pricing ends for the more intermediate course, which is really about refining your chart reading skills. So that course requires a pretty good grasp of astrology. You can't sort of learn on the fly with that course. It's a lot of mentoring from me. Both of these courses are entirely live with me. You're not going to get upfront recordings, maybe here and there in terms of filling in gaps, but otherwise it's me, and you will get to ask me questions directly. So that was what I wanted to mention. I will also be back at my readings pretty much as of next week. And thanks for those of you who've had to have your readings moved around. I really appreciate your flexibility. I think that's it for the announcements. So, what I wanted to point out here is the old-fashioned way of understanding planetary ingress. And I think it still stands, even though there's quite a lot of hype in other directions. This is boring astrology here. So if you wanted to have all kinds of superlatives and extraordinary words and clickbait, you really need to go somewhere else. This is good old-fashioned boring astrology that simply looks at charts and takes the information from the chart. So although we obviously at the same time have an eclipse coming up just 3 days after Saturn's ingress into Aries, and we have the conjunction 3 days after that, on the 20th of February, the conjunction with Saturn and Neptune. I'm going to focus here on the Saturn ingress. And I've already done other videos about the Saturn Neptune, and believe me, you will hear more about that as well over the next couple of years. So before I look at this specific chart, just to remind some of you who are watching who might have Saturn in Aries that the dates are the most recent episode of Saturn in Aries was last year. I'm presuming that you weren't born last year if you're listening, but just to tie that up. This is the second ingress, and that was the first time was on the 25th of May of 2025, and it went through to the end of August. So by the 1st of September 2025, Saturn had moved back into Pisces. I'm always using universal time and dates. And so when we go back before that ingress, we were looking from the 7th of April, 1996, until the 9th of June, 1998. Then Saturn dipped back, or rather dipped forward into Taurus from the 25th of, hang on a minute. So from the 2nd of June, 1998, it went into Taurus, and then it went back into Aries on the 25th of October, 1998, and left finally and moved back into Taurus on the 28th of February, 1999. And those of you who were born in the previous cycle, that was there was no interruption in that cycle. It was entirely Saturn and Aries just moved in and kept going. And that was from the 3rd of March, 1967, till the 29th of April, 1969. So if you are born within those dates, and I'll put them in the description box below this video, you will have a natal Saturn in Aries. This means it's your Saturn return. So it adds even more emphasis, let's say, to what I'm about to say here, in terms of what the Saturn in Aries can represent for us, and things that you can work with that are actually deeply personal. But we're all dealing with Saturn. It's a generational planet, and one that tells us a lot about the sort of mood of the day or the era that we're living in. So prior to discovering the outer planets, Saturn was the reference as the most distant planet and was always considered sort of the limit of the known universe. It's the one planet that we can see, or the farthest planet that we can see with the naked eye. And so yeah, so for many of you, you're having your first or second Saturn return. Some of you might be having your third Saturn return if you're born around 1940. I'll put those dates in the again in the information box below here. So think about how you are evolving, how you're maturing, how you're taking on a new role. And you've got this period that already started in mid 2025 that gave you a sense of that, including with Neptune. And we have these now 2 years and 2 months-ish of this opportunity to grow. And then we'll go sign by sign because we all have this coming in the various houses wherever Aries is represented in the chart. Now, we're looking at this chart as the Ingress chart, 14th of February. For those of us who are not a fan of the Valentine's Day for its high commercialism, this is a chart that just destroys it once and for all. So maybe we'll have people finally just calming the hell down around Valentine's Day, because this would be not an easy day for a Valentine's Day. I mean, you tell me differently in the comments if you had a fabulous time, but let's see who shows up. So this originally, you'll hear a lot of people. There have been so many videos posted about this. You might have heard people talking about the 13th of February. That would apply if you live in North or South America. But anyone living from Ireland, the UK, and eastbound, So, meaning the rest of the world, most of the world, this is in universal time, 14th of February, and that would be, again, by extension, the 14th of February per time zone going eastbound. So that's an interesting way to start off the notion of Valentine's Day, which of course is all about ease and romance and feeling all loved up. And this is not a really easy energy for that, partly because Saturn rules Capricorn. It also rules Aquarius, and this is where we find the moon straight off the bat in its detriment at the ingress chart. Now, the ingress chart gives us a flavor what we can expect. It's like a birth chart, which is why it's useful to know, what's going on in this natal chart, as opposed to just narrowing down Saturn and moving into Aries, because it doesn't really complete the story of this particular moment in time. And when we look at the ingress chart, think of it as that imprint of this is the mood, and that mood carries forward. And of course, even within the other fluctuations of different events that are happening, even in just this week alone, it's still the mood of Saturn going into Aries, even if there's other things that are factoring in. And that's why it matters that the moon itself, which in a mundane chart, in a general chart like this, can represent the people, the masses, the hoi polloi. This is ruled by Saturn, and it's a moon that is in its fall, rather in its detriment, because it's in the opposite sign to Cancer, where it is in its rulership. And that's where we find a retrograde Jupiter. And this retrograde Jupiter is about to be opposed really strongly by this moon, just only moments after Saturn has moved into Aries. Now, when the moon is in Capricorn, and this does not describe you as a person if you have moon in Capricorn, just notice that this is the archetype of the moon in Capricorn, but it will also describe, in a general sense, the mood of this energy that we're collectively moving into. The moon in Capricorn is about doing what is necessary, doing the right thing. It's more pragmatic and disciplined and controlled, not emotional, not empathetic. It's not easy to build up a sense of empathy. It's just, sort yourself out, get on with it. It's that stiff upper lip, or the keep calm and carry on, just put your head down and soldier on kind of energy. Um, Sit down and stop complaining about your voice or whatever. That's the moon in Capricorn. And so the other aspect of this is that it can go in one or another way, which is difficult to say when the moon is in opposition to Jupiter. But one of the ways is that there is an increase in obedience to authority, or what you could describe as more of a submission to authority, because there's a sense of there's no choice here. We have to do this thing. And I'll let you extrapolate into your own life or into the global situation. There's just no empathy or sense of, there's no sympathy around weakness or vulnerability at this point. Now, again, it catches a mood in the global situation in so many ways, because we're all so entirely fed up, I think, also with the leaders that we're dealing with and with the structures that we're dealing with, which is also very Capricornian, and especially when we tie that into Aries, where we find the ruler of Capricorn at 0 degrees at the Aries point, representing something that affects all of us, right? Um, but the other way that this can go is, aside from that sort of submission or obedience, it can go towards this resentment, like a burning, simmering resentment of precisely that authority or any kind of control or being told what to do. And in that opposition to Jupiter, either way, it's going to magnify emotions. It's going to magnify those feelings. And so we probably will see a bit of both of this over the next couple of years, where we get this kind of no holds barred, just suck it up and carry on kind of energy, or we get this rebellious quality, which is also a part of the bigger story with Uranus, which is still very much in the picture in Taurus now, going direct for the last 10 days. So since the 4th of February, Uranus station direct. It's in opposition or being opposed by Black Moon Lilith, in Scorpio, and Black Moon Lilith is it's excessive. It goes into this understanding of where we are pissed off, where we're frustrated, where we feel resentful, or where we feel un, not maybe dishonored is another way of saying that. Um, it's also where we, in the sign of Scorpio, where we find secrets and where we find things that have a lot to do with the underbelly, the hidden underbelly of society, which has been so highly focused on. I'm not going to go into any of those digressions because I think everybody else has done it to death. After coming back from the most wonderful, glorious, peaceful, silent retreat in the silent desert. I really, for 2 days, I could not pick up my phone. I just didn't want to break the spell. It was so magical to remember what it was like to simply live my life. And here I'm going to tie that in to the Saturn in Aries, where the last time Saturn was in Aries, we still were very much in that in the 1990s, especially in the 1960s, but in the 1990s, in this area of life where the internet didn't dominate us. And it was very much something that we would go to occasionally, and some people not at all. And Saturn in Aries is about restructuring one's identity and trying to fit oneself in to the rest of life or to the rest of the social elements. And this is something that really stood out to me when I came back, because when I did eventually turn on the dreaded phone and emails and things coming from Substack or from YouTube or whatever, everybody and his freaking uncle was talking about the thing that I don't want to talk about, which is crazy because again, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier, and this is again a Saturn and Aries things. It's not off topic. It's really about what I'm trying to communicate here, which is that we need to own who we are and who we want to be in this life. This is also very much about that Mahashivratri that I mentioned in the very beginning. Shiva, and Lord Shiva is consciousness, is the Lord of transformation. Shiva does the dance of life itself, starting out with dancing into existence, all of life, and maintaining it, and then dancing it out of existence as well. And this is where we have to face reality. And like Saturn, which is the Lord of karma, the Lord of death, it's the cold, hard reality of how do we take action? How do we participate? How do we show up as ourselves in this life? So so this is a moment in time where all of that noise, it was not just noisy because I was coming off a silent retreat, although it was a much more stark relief, but all of that noise is a distraction. And notice how much of your energy and time is getting sucked into all the nitty-gritty details, all the little bits and pieces of the drama, and how that is taking you away from where you need to be to build your life from this point on, because we're moving into a whole new, just this whole week, forget the rest of the 2 years, just coping with this week. We're moving in to an enormous amount of novelty, and we're shifting. And if we can do that consciously, and we do that in a way that is really pulling our attention into who we are, what do we want, how do we want to work with this, we can be pragmatic in that Capricorn moon kind of way. We can understand where we're angry in that Black Moon Lilith opposite Uranus, full of the surprises and the surprise revelations and the surprise, eruptions of anger and all the other things. Toxicity, that's also Scorpionic. We can look at all of that and say, okay, well, where do I want to fit into this? Where do I want to actually consciously put myself, my attention, my energy? And this is a time to really reflect on that. So this is Saturn is in general, it's about what truth am I avoiding? And that's again coming back to that Mahashivratri energy, which is about facing something that is real and then saying, okay, I'm shifting my gears here. I'm doing something different. Um, what is the truth that you're avoiding? And we'll look at again in the Aries part of the chart for everyone. especially if this is your Saturn return. This is your big question. Put it on a sticky note on the fridge or the bathroom mirror or something like that. What is the truth I'm avoiding? And that can be moment by moment, or it can be a bigger thing. What is the responsibility that I'm avoiding? That's another way of posing the question. And in what way am I maturing? Can I see that I can't let mommy and daddy keep solving all the problems, or if we, by extension, think of the government as mommy and daddy, I can't live like that. It doesn't work like that. So one of the other aspects of this that is going to be necessary to follow now that Saturn is here in Aries for the next 2+ years is what Mars is doing. So whatever Mars is doing is significant because Mars is going to be ruling Saturn all the way through this period. And we have Mars moving into Aries in April. That's going to be a whole different kettle of fish because there's going to be a ton of planets, a huge stellium in Aries in April. Prior to that, there's going to be quite a stellium in Pisces as well. But for the moment, Mars is actually in Aquarius, and that's a Saturn ruled sign. And I do work with the traditional rulerships, and of course, we can still consider Uranus, which is still very much, in a modern sense, the ruler of Aquarius as well. But Saturn is the Lord of disruption and ending. So people always say, yes, but Uranus is about revolution. Well, that's maybe true because of the discovery of Uranus during revolutionary times, during the same time that, Pluto was moving through Aquarius and creating that revolutionary energy itself. But before we knew about, the collective astrological we knew about Uranus, it was Saturn that was the more revolutionary, disruptive planet, along with Mars. And endings and breaking down and decay and things falling apart and needing to be rebuilt, that's all Saturn. And so we don't want to forget the role that Saturn, a very important role that Saturn has to play in Aquarius and as the ruler of Aquarius. Now, what's interesting here is that we have this, what we have to call mutual generosity in the traditional way of looking at that. It's not a mutual, it's not an aspect that can be considered a traditional aspect, which is like the major aspects or the minor ones, meaning like the sextiles and the semi-sextiles and so on. But these aspects, it's sextiling by sign, but it's not in by degree. And so if we look at that, we have to call it a mutual generosity as opposed to a mutual reception. Either way, they're helping each other at this stage, or they're understanding each other. And we have Mars, the rebel, Mars, the action taker, Mars, the disruptive force or the force for action that is directing the action that Saturn wants to establish in Aries. So as we go through Saturn in Aries until April the 12th of 2028, we have to follow whatever Mars is doing. We need to keep track of Mars. And that's essentially one Mars cycle. So we have this, it's a 2-year cycle, the cycle of Mars. So by the time Mars meets up with Saturn in Aries in April, that's going to be really triggering the theme, we could call it, of the cycle, the new cycle between Mars and Saturn that is already being illustrated here as we are looking at the ingress of Saturn into Mars-ruled Aries. So keep that in mind. Whatever sign that Mars is in is going to be completing the instructions that you're waiting for. Because if you don't have a goal in Aries, in that Aries part of your life, with Saturn going into Aries, you can get into quite the funk. You can get into a serious sense of pointlessness or uselessness or frustration or depression or feeling of inadequacy. Saturn doesn't like being in Aries because it's all about let's go, let's do this thing, let's just jump in. And Saturn wants a plan, it wants a structure, it wants things to be done in a way that is going to make it last. And Mars is not that bothered about making things lasting. It just wants action. It wants to go now. Equally, this is why Mars itself can be a little bit touchy in Aquarius because it's ruled by Saturn. And it doesn't like having restrictions. And there's social restrictions when we have any planets in Aquarius, or there's something about having to look left and right and see who's standing there when you're talking about Aquarius. And Mars is in there going, yeah, but I have a plan. And then Aquarius is also an air sign, and it's very much about the intellectual understanding of things. And it can be very strongly opinionated with the Mars and Aquarius. So this is going to add to the moon in opposition to in moon in detriment in opposition to a retrograde Jupiter in Cancer. And I think we probably won't be able to fully embrace all of that until, Jupiter is stationing direct on the 11th of March. And then we have much more information coming through from mid-March into April and through April when things start to come together in Aries again. So there is going to be a lot of antsiness, a lot of potential for frustration arising in this phase, in this particular moment in time. And so, again, don't get sucked into all the details and the bling bling and the drama and the every everybody and his dog literally talking about this whole event that is going on here that I feel very strongly is distracting from something that's much, much more important on a human level, first of all, and also on a collective level, where we really need to pay attention to what is going on and become aware of the level to which we're being distracted, because we get caught up in this whole story very, very easily. Now, having said that, also we have, along with Pluto, which is also in Aquarius, we have the Sun in Aquarius, and the Sun is in fall in Aquarius. The Sun, sorry, it's not in fall, it's in its detriment because it's the ruler of Leo, so the ruler of the opposite sign. When it's in the opposite sign of the sign it rules, it's called detriment. And sorry, I get confusing these terms. Um, I'm just a bit slow at the moment. The one planet that is in fall, in fact, is Saturn, and I haven't even mentioned that because it's in exaltation in Libra. So here we have Saturn, the one planet that I'm talking about or not talking about, who's in fall. But the sun is in detriment. And what does the sun represent? It represents our leaders. It represents ourself and our own consciousness and what we're considering, what we're thinking about. And the sun is the exaltation ruler of Aries. It's very important that we look at this moment in terms of setting up the future moments, especially the near future moments, once Mars moves into Aries and the Sun then moves into Aries. So by the third week of March, we'll have the Sun moving into Aries at the equinox, and then we're going to have the ingress of Mars, and I think that's the last week of March. I forgot that date, and I will let me just double check how that's going to pan out here. Let me just see if we go forward, I can tell you here, because that's going to be important to just look at. Okay, so here we have Mars zooming right along, and indeed it goes in April. It goes into Aries. So that's going to be on the 9th, 10th of April. All right, um, from the third week of March, when the Sun moves into Aries, on the 9th and 10th of April, when Mars moves into Aries, we're probably going to get a much clearer idea of what it is that we really need to do and take action on, how we're moving forward. The eclipse energies will have been at least partially digested, if not fully digested by that time, and because they do linger, they will linger for many months to come. But I think we'll have a clearer conception of what it is that's going on, but we need to pay attention already here. And so we're getting our instructions about this new Saturn ingress from this Mars, and we're getting some extra clarity around that from the Sun when it ingresses at the equinox, when it comes into Aries. Now, aside from all of that, we have Venus, the North Node, and Mercury together in Pisces, which is 12th from Saturn. It's the sign that Saturn just left. When we look at Rahu or the North Node, we're looking at expansion, something that is potentially obsessive. It's things that have to do with lack of clarity. The colors of Rahu Ketu are gray, foggy, misty. Things are not clear. And that lack of clarity is coming from that obsessive quality when we're too focused on something. And this is, again, a bit of a warning to be careful where you're putting your energy, where you pick up on distractions and all the he said, she said, all of the details. And again, not to say that these things are not important, it's just to say that, that like Alan Watts used to say about doing drugs. It's like once you hear the message, put down the phone. You don't need to keep dragging it out. You get the message. We understood the message. We don't need to know what positions everybody was in or whatever. You just need to know that this is going on. And some of us don't need to know it at all. So we can get on with our beautiful silent desert treks and enjoy life like we used to. So yeah, so all of this to say that we have a lot of this fogginess that still remains, even though Neptune and now Saturn have left Pisces. We're still not in the clarity zone until the North Node shifts away from Pisces, takes away that Rahuvian confusion or that energy of obsession or the everything expansive all at once kind of imaginal space that Pisces can bring, especially with the North Node there, where that's not going to clear up until the third week of July when the North Node moves into Aquarius. And that is something that you will definitely want to pick up on as the eclipse is happening, because that will be close to the zone where the nodes will shift on the 27th of July. Um, when there's this nodal shift. So we're getting a prelude of that as well this week, on top of the other aspects of the spring, especially around April, of what is coming up. So all of this, and also the one last thing that I need to point out about this chart, or it's next to last, penultimate thing I want to point out about this chart is that we have a square building from the Sun to Uranus, and in fact, by now, by today, tomorrow, by the 16th of February, that is already happening. So 15th to the 16th of February of the Sun square Uranus. So even after the ingress of Saturn and the fact that Uranus is in this opposition to Black Moon Lilith, and then it creates a T square with that Sun, there are going to be more revelations, more surprises, more things coming up, or perhaps even on a personal level, especially if you have planets in these points around these late degrees, the last 5 degrees of any fixed sign, for example, or the first 4 or 5 degrees of any cardinal sign, the fixed signs being Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, and then the cardinal signs being Aries and Cancer and Libra and Capricorn. Those places are being affected. But I mean, this is one of those years, and I've said it before, where everything's being affected. So it's not like you need to worry about the degree points in your chart, except for specific particular events. Now, that square is going to be potentially illuminating or potentially confusing. And again, it's partly tied into the fact that Mercury is still very close to the North Node, and it will come back and station direct on the North Node after it does its retrograde phase. So it's going to go from the 26th of February, it stations retrograde, and then comes all the way back to this North Node point that it's just connected with just before the Saturn ingress. And it's going to bring more information. And then that will be from I think it's the 20th of March when it connects with this North Node. And then a few days from now, we've got Venus coming to this North Node. And Venus is exalted in Pisces, and Venus will be on the North Node at the time of the eclipse of the 17th of February. And that also puts her out of range of the sun, meaning that both Venus and Mercury are away from the beams of the sun. And Mars is still under the beams. We don't see Mars. It's not behaving in a direct manner, let's say. And even though Venus is now shifting away from the beams of the sun, or will be by the time of the eclipse, and Mercury already has, They're so close to the North Node that there can be this obsessive or compulsive or over-the-top reaction to everything that is Venusian and everything to do with Mercury in terms of communication and so on. And of course, Mercury is both in detriment and in fall in Pisces. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own intelligence. It means that the intelligence of Mercury is intuitive, it's sensitive. And that's something that could be, again, another reason to unplug from all of the distractions and excess, because it's very hard to listen to messages coming in when there's so much noise, so much focus, so much going on. Equally, at the time of the eclipse, we're going to have, or rather, at the time that Saturn and Neptune conjoin, the moon itself will also be in Aries. And I think it's like 12 degrees of Aries. So there's going to be a reference to what is going on now and how that becomes evident or how that feels by the time Saturn and Neptune are conjoining. And that's going to be a separate topic. We've done that already. I have done that in previous videos, even including from last year. So and if it hasn't been coming through me, you'll get it a million ways to Sunday from other people. Right. So I think the last thing I want to point out is this semi-sextile between Pluto and Venus. And again, that is uncomfortable energy. That Pluto, we know, is going to also be in a sextile. It's going to hold a sextile to Neptune throughout this year and all of 2027 as well. And it will briefly be sextiled by Saturn as well. And that will come through March as well. So this whole movement of, the shifting of energy, we will feel palpably, but it's uncomfortable at this point. And so what we're looking at here when we look at the ingress chart is the flavor of these 2 years to come. And again, as I said, it doesn't mean that things won't move in different directions or be transformed by the different transits and other events that are coming up. But just to give you the sense, this is tension. This is not easy or comfortable energy. And I know that a lot of the description of these mini grand trines and the basket and so on are all about positive change and things interjecting in ways that are somehow miraculous and magical. And I do believe that certainly on an individual level, we have a lot of capacity to orient ourselves in that direction. And we cannot expect that there will be a collective awakening or some kind of I don't know what some people are talking about in ways of um, elevation. I don't know where people think they're going, but wherever people feel like there's going to be some magical change. Um, I I hate to say this, but I'm going to repeat what I've been saying for years now, which is that that change is coming through discomfort. There's no way around that. So the more that you are focusing on yourself, on knowing who you are, understanding your role in your life and the things that you choose and how you're choosing them, the less you will be affected, hopefully, by the bigger outer changes. And in some cases, that's going to require a selective ignoring of things as they're happening. And that is not to remain uninformed, it's just to choose how you are informing yourself. And is that information constructive or necessary to accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish? Speaking of what you want to accomplish, what you might consider as we're going into this new era of mini era of 2 years with Saturn going through Aries is to ask yourself, what have I accomplished so far in my life? And it doesn't matter, you might be 16, and you can look at like puff yourself up a little bit. Really look at your life. And even if you feel like you're in a stuck place right now, look at everything that you've done and look at how you've behaved. And again, this is about being realistic. This is facing reality. It's the imaging of the Mahashivratri of today as I'm recording this on Sunday the 15th and over to the 16th that leads us to this eclipse energy, but it's also the truth of Saturn. Saturn is like massively hitting the reality restrictions. It's the budget that has run out. It's the wall we run into. It's the walls that are collapsing. It's the marriage that's collapsing. It's the job that's just disappearing. All of those things, those are the realities of this moment in time or this phase of your life that you want to look at and say, okay, that's happening, but not then insert yourself into a drama. And this is where I warn this because of the Venus Mercury on the North Node. It can get very histrionic. There can be lots and lots of, over the top imaginings or things that take you into an area, especially as that's 12 houses from Saturn, taking you into an area of depletion or distraction or taking you away from what you can do about things. There's always something that you can do about things. Now, when one of those questions being about the what have I accomplished, write down every little thing. Like especially if you're stuck, if you have a pretty good grip on that and you're in a good place, you don't even need to do that exercise necessarily, although that can be very helpful anyway. But then ask yourself as a corollary or just as another question, um, what are my goals? Aries needs a goal. And as I said, if Saturn in Aries doesn't have a goal based on this Mars and what it's doing, and we'll see that sign by sign, so I'll focus on that in a minute. Um, then you really need to create a goal because it'll lead you towards a feeling of inadequacy or depression um, or the worst, which is part of an Aries trait, which is to compare yourself. Saturn in fire signs tends to compare itself, but Aries anyway tends to compare. How am I doing next to X? How am I managing? What's my salary compared to? Or, where am I at this age compared to somebody else at this age? Do not compare. Comparison is the thief of joy, as the expression goes. And this is something that you want to avoid at all costs, not just for the next 2+ years, but in your life. Don't do it. You have a unique life. And this is a moment in time where you can direct that life. And if you're comparing and if you're busy looking at how everybody else, and that comparison, by the way, also includes feeling superior to other people. It doesn't always, the bluster of a Saturn in Aries, the shadowy bluster side of the Saturn in Aries is about puffing yourself up so much that there's an arrogance. And that can also be true of the other fire signs as well. So don't be that guy or girl, and use this opportunity to really say, well, what are my goals for the next little while? You could set yourself up for goals in stages. It could be like each time Mars changes a sign, sit down with yourself and say, are these goals still aligning, for example? Or another way, which is more my way of doing things, is especially with the outer planets when they go retrograde, I sit down and I say, well, what worked in the time that the planets were direct and what has not been working and that I need to put more energy into or relate differently to or ditch completely. And so you use the Saturn retrograde cycle. So Saturn will station retrograde on the 26th of July. That's again literally one day before the nodes are going to shift into the Saturn ruled sign. The North Node shifts into Aquarius and the Saturn ruled sign of Aquarius on the 27th. And so that station retrograde is going to be at 14 degrees and 44 minutes of Aries. So it's the first half of Aries. So if you have planets in the first and second decan of Aries, and especially if that's your Saturn, from those dates that I mentioned in the beginning, this is a question that you really must stay on top of, really examine that. Um, and so, checking your goals against your own goals, not against other people's goals, not against other people's achievements. And remember, I'm directing my life. This is Saturn in Aries. I'm taking ownership and mastery of myself. Oh, and by the way, if you have Saturn in Aries, I'll mention that again in the comments, and I've mentioned that again in a recent post. Use the code self mastery, all in one word, all in caps, to get 10% off a reading with me. Um, and again, I'll repeat that in the description below. Now, the other things that I want to focus on is that Saturn has, especially in Aries, it has its defense mechanisms, and we all do. So we all have sort of ways of working in this way. So this will be to a greater or lesser extent, but because Saturn in Aries often is tied to self-esteem. It's tied to feelings of inadequacy or feeling of whatever the level of adequacy is. These defense mechanisms that are typical of Saturn can show up, and they will drag you down, and that also comes along with this. What I hadn't mentioned at this point is the Chiron Eris, which is also a feature and very much part of the signature of Saturn in Aries for the next 2+ years. Even if Chiron is going to be leaving Aries, it's still here at the birth of Saturn ingressing Aries. And the fact that Chiron is within about, just less than a degree of Eris is important. And I've done a separate video on that. You can find that in my playlist and hear more about that. So we're not going to spend time on that at this point. But one of the Saturn defense mechanisms that ties into the Chiron energy of self-sabotage or feelings of inadequacy or whatever, that is about projection. I do not take responsibility. I won't admit responsibility, or I'm not able to take responsibility, and I project blame onto others. So projecting onto the government, projecting onto your spouse, onto your parents, onto the lawnmower that won't start, whatever the thing is. Um, Own it. Now is your chance to really grow up and own it. This is, no more fooling around. This is what this Saturn ruled moon is saying, get out of bed, suck it up, sort yourself out. That doesn't have to be in a non-compassionate way. It's coming from this place of hard, what's the word? Tough love. You remember that movement, the tough love movement of the 70s and 80s, which was pretty brutal, let's face it. But so that is something that you can work on, for example, as you're looking back on these notions of your goals and the things that you're working on, how you've accomplished things or how you wish to accomplish things going forward. Um, and that, by the way, that retrograde cycle, although it begins on the 26th of July, it ends on the 10th of December when Saturn stations direct. And that will be, a margin of time, sort of 4.5 months of time where you can really examine those things. And then you move into the next year, sort of calendar year, with a feeling of, okay, this is the plan, this is the thing. The Saturn will be stationing around 8 degrees of Aries and still has the rest of Aries to go for the next sort of 14 months after that. Um, so these are the questions that tie in with this self-defense mechanism. Regression is often a result of that projection. So when you project onto something inanimate, your lawnmower, whatever, the dog, your job, the government, there's something outside of you that is making your life bad or wrong, or the economy, the usual stuff. You're not taking responsibility, you're regressing into avoidance of responsibility and a childish behavior. Note that I didn't say childlike, it's childish. It means I'm helpless. I can't face this. So we already confronted in a lot of ways over the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years, with Saturn going through Pisces, confronting that victim or the martyr or the sort of sense of this being the sacrificial lamb. We've confronted that, and we're looking at that to a certain extent still with North Node still being in Pisces for the next 6 months or so. Now with Saturn in Aries, it's like, okay, my self-confidence, my sense of self, my self-awareness, my mastery over myself hinges on me becoming aware of these things. And this is how I can reconstruct myself. And then noticing also that self-defense mechanisms can also be born through repression. I repress myself. I hold myself back. That can be a self-defense mechanism in the sense, just like with Chiron in Aries, of being afraid of being evaluated by somebody else or being judged by somebody else. Notice that if that's happening, you yourself are already doing the judging. So nobody's afraid of being judged by somebody else if they're not already judging other people as well as themselves. So notice that. So be careful of that repression of who you are, of how you are, how you express yourself. And then there's suppression. That repression might have come from parental authority or teachers, for example, or even a social restriction that says, you can't do that. You can't walk down the street naked or whatever. Saturn in Aries does not want to walk down the street naked, but I'm just giving you an example. Um, but that repression then becomes a suppression, which is you with reference to what emotions do I suppress? How do I suppress my desires? How do I suppress myself in terms of, oh, I can't do that. I couldn't possibly want that. They wouldn't possibly want me in their club or in their marriage or whatever. And there again, we come back to what I was speaking about before, this feeling of the Protestant type of work ethic, that stiff upper lip and soldering on, keep calm and carry on. That is the other way that we can throw up these defenses and these barriers to finding one's own self-worth and self-mastery. And then finally, if all of that is happening and there is not this, observation of the Mars and the goals that can be set in the areas of life that Mars is pointing to or giving you inspiration from, um, you're going to end up somatizing these issues that I've mentioned before, the projection and regression, the repression, the suppression, all get expressed through the body symbolically. And that somatization can lead to depression with Saturn in Aries, right? So that's the feeling of worthlessness, the feeling of not being good enough, and it can somatize as burnout or depression or something along those lines. So be careful with those ideas. Be careful to include that in an ongoing self-observation. I also have mentioned in previous videos where you can ask yourself the question, what is it that I'm doing that I need to stop doing? What is it that I'm not doing that I need to start doing? And questions like this can be really helpful. And if I use myself in terms of the voice as an example, that voice, losing the voice, having coughing fits, that's part of a childhood pattern that comes back from a childhood issue that I've been grappling with, and you get on top of things and you kind of understand it, and the new layers come up. And so that would be one way of understanding the somatic expression of symptoms. It's somatizing something that was not able to be said or was repressed in childhood and suppressed as we go through life. So in my case, speaking up and saying what needed to be said. So we'll turn now to the sign by sign. So let me just put this to the hours. We need Saturn to be in Aries, and I don't want too much clutter here. So I'm actually going to take away a bunch of stuff because otherwise we'll be here for hours and hours. I'm going to keep Mars, keep Saturn, obviously. We're going to take away Jupiter, the outer planets. We're taking all of it away. Pluto, Chiron. Let's go. Sun, Moon. We're just going to look at Mars. We're going to take away Black Moon, Lilith. We're just going to look at Mars and Saturn for maximum clarity, for my own ways of looking at this. Okay, so we're looking to Aries as the rising sign, as Saturn is moving into Aries. Now, for the second time, we had this last year, 2025, mid-2025, we had this little adventure of Saturn just moving into the first degree of Aries, and it was there with Neptune at the time, just as it is now. And I'm doing a separate video on that, so Neptune is not here. Um, Actually, should we keep Neptune? No, you know what? We're focusing on Saturn. That's it. We have to draw the line somewhere, or it's just chaos, at least in my mind. All right, so Aries, Saturn in your sign. You must listen to the introduction if you haven't already, because that will give you a lot of understanding around how you and this the energy of the next couple of years are going to be dancing. And so what we want to understand is really how you're going to be rebuilding yourself with Saturn in Aries. But often, as usual, when we rebuild something, it's because it's either been broken down or we are tearing it down. And so we have this opportunity now to say, well, okay, this is about my life. This is about me in every aspect of my life. So this is whether it's Aries, Sun, Moon, or Ascendant. all of these domains with the you'll see the what they represent in the description box. The energy of Aries is being rebuilt and reconstructed, that is setting up the whole, almost like the starting point of your life. And this is something to take very seriously. So Mars, your ruler, is the guide here, and you're anyway advised to keep track of Mars going through the signs, because it's your ruler. And here we find that in the 11th house of your future. So it's really looking forward to your future. What is my vision for the future? What is the way that I want to interact socially or with society or with the area of life that connects me to my elder sibling, for example, or people who are, I consider my fans or my followers or my audience, if you like. And so all of that energy is feeding into a goal that you're setting up for yourself. I need to rebuild my life in a way that I'm recognizing who I am. I'm describing myself afresh at this point. Saturn is giving you not quite a tabula rasa, but it's giving you the opposite opportunity to just say, well, this is who I am. This is who I feel myself to be. And this is how I want to go forward into the future. So this is a really key period of your life, these next 2 years, and you'll be hearing a lot more about this as we go, because Saturn will be here permanently, for 2 years plus 2 months in your house of self. Now, if you ever feel low, you feel that your self-worth is being impinged on, or you find yourself you're finding yourself lost, you're losing your way, go back to Mars, go back to what I said in the beginning of this video, and take that seriously. Take yourself as a project, set yourself goals. You can set yourself goals, like I said, for each period that Mars moves into a sign. That's roughly 6 weeks of time, a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on the sign. And then you can set yourself up and say, okay, I can handle this. 6 weeks of time, I'm going to handle this much. And this will be where I put my focus. This is where I'm going to put my energy, with this flavor of this sign and the ruler of that sign. So that's one way of working with this. But you are in for a major restructuring of your life, a major restructuring of whether that be with reference to your relational dynamics, because Saturn is opposing your house relationship, or your career dynamic, or your social status, which is the Saturn ruled 10th house where Capricorn is. You're restructuring yourself in a massive way. It can even be with reference to your family or your psychological or emotional life. In many ways, you're having to reframe you within the context of your life. Now, look back on those other dates if you're old enough to have been around in from April 96 to roughly end of February 99, with a little pause in between in the second half of 1998. That was when Saturn was in your sign the last time. And even for those who are much older again, and that was March 1967 to April 69. So look at what was going on in your life in those times. And if you were a child in those, let's say in the 60s or even in the 90s, look to what your parents were doing and how that impacted on your life, and rebuild yourself in this way. And anyway, you're feeling this. It's not like I'm telling you something new. You feel what needs to change, what needs to shift, and it's very, very personal to you. So good luck with that, Aries, and I will see you in the next video. Taurus, Saturn has moved into your 12th house. It's being guided by Mars in your 10th house. So the 12th house is very much about understanding yourself in terms of what is behind the eyes. It's everything that is unconscious or hidden from you, or it's something to do with people who are at a distance or far away from you, or what you're building from within in terms of your own spiritual connection, your spiritual life. Saturn rules your 9th house of God, as well as the 10th house of your social status and what you do outside the front door. And that's very important, because Mars is there at that time ruling Saturn from the 10th house. So there's a lot of your understanding or a sense of what needs to come through in unconscious ways that is connected to your faith, to your sense of your spiritual self, to your social projections or your social participation, how people see you. And then with Saturn going through the 12th for 2.5 years, it's a very, very good time to reconcile yourself to what might be going on in terms of ancestral trauma or things that you've inherited in terms of addictions or ancestral patterns that have been, messing you up in some way. And we don't have it here, but Chiron is still there in the 12th, and you all anyway have been looking for quite some time already at these patterns of self-undoing and things that need to be addressed. And here now Saturn comes in and says, do it, just get on it, just take that action. The best way to begin is to begin. This is the Aries energy of just do it. And Saturn is like, yes, let's just do it, but we're doing it with a purpose. We're doing it with a structure. And so if this is something that has to do with depression or a feeling of being lost spiritually or needing some kind of support or feeling that you're missing your people or missing somebody you have lost, for example, this would be the opportunity to ask for support, get support, and find yourself in the place that allows you to feel that support. And Saturn in the 12th, especially because it also rules the ninth, can have you feeling that there's a need to go abroad or a need to move away somewhere far away, or that there's a connection that you feel with something that takes you into retreat or takes you away from the madding crowd, as it were. So this could also be something that you decide, I want to structure that now. I want to create the context for stepping back for a little bit of time. This is great, for example, if you are deciding to write a book. You've got Jupiter in your third house of writing, for example, and Saturn going into Aries, being the ruler of the ninth house of publishing, and your 10th house of, how you show up in the world, potentially your vocation or your career. This could be a great time to step back and write a book or to feel that you're able to work on a project that's not necessarily immediately visible, that will become visible later, later in this stage of Saturn going through the 12th or later in another phase of Saturn itself. So definitely listen to the introduction to see if there is something that you really need to explore. What haven't I said? What needs to be said? What haven't I come to terms with? What haven't I taken responsibility with? It will all be there, potentially including, trauma that I have had to endure through my life at some phase. And now am I able to look at it squarely and take responsibility for healing? Because sixth house, 12th house axis is about your healing as well. No longer projecting onto others what I can acknowledge finally for myself. So this is the opportunity. It is going to be disruptive to you or to your sense of your place in the world, or even to your mental, psychological peace of mind until you take ownership of whatever's going there beneath the surface or hidden behind closed eyes, as it were. So it's an opportunity, and it's also an opportunity for you to really live your spirit. If you claim to be a spiritual person, but you don't go to whatever the context is for you, or you're not doing your practices that you should be doing, that your teacher wants you to do, especially as the ninth house is the house of Guru and the house of God and so on. Saturn is there ruling that in the 12th house, saying put structure to that, set an agenda where you're going to sit for a few moments or whatever, a couple of times a day, reconnect yourself with yourself. That's what Saturn is asking here, and that will support all of the rest of your experience. All right, Taurus, I'll see you in the next video. Good luck with that. Gemini, Saturn is in your 11th house of your future, and it's ruled by Mars in the ninth house of your purpose. And this is where the ingress chart is influencing you very strongly. Do listen to the introduction to hear more about that. With Saturn in the 11th house, you also are reconfiguring your dreams and saying, well, you know what? The thing I used to think I had to do, it's not really that anymore, or it's just not possible. The context has changed. The 11th house is also connecting you to friends and acquaintances or networks that might be work-based, or it might be based on a hobby or a spiritual practice or political group. And there you're suddenly finding yourself in a position where I am now deciding I need new friends in my life, or I'm going to reorganize my social life and really only invest in the time and people who actually understand me or who are sharing the same life experiences as me. Um, this is a very good practice for you, Gemini, because you're a social sign and you tend to take all comers. You can be very easy peasy with people and kind of connect with people. You've got that Sagittarian seventh house, which just kind of launches into relationships. And that's what gives you that definition as a Gemini of being very socially sort of all over the place. And this can be very good to restructure that, where am I losing energy by connecting with people who are not bringing me the best of themselves or what I feel nourished by. And Saturn in the 11th will establish lasting friendships. This is the thing about Saturn. It creates something lasting. It creates something um, that is going to be setting you up in a new way with reference to your future dreams or your hopes and your wishes for the future, as well as those people that you want to spend time with getting there, including even if you're working in terms of an audience or if you're working in terms of um, like a project that's even if an online project, for example, this would be the people who follow you, your followers, your fans, whatever. You can restructure that. So don't be surprised, don't be disappointed if you find that there's a restriction around that or there's some kind of limitation around that. It's a temporary limitation that says, are you sure this is the right people, place, thing that you're moving towards? And do you want to take a minute to step back and look at that with all of the questions that I've asked as well in the beginning? You also want to notice in this case where those self-defense mechanisms that I listed in the beginning can be showing up socially for you, and that this will show up as feelings of isolation for you. So then you can work with this feeling of, how do I use my Saturnian self-defense mechanisms and, cut and run instead of investing deeper in relationships. And that is, again, a Gemini trait. Um, so Saturn is saying, look at these things. Look at how you, Aries, show up in the collective or show up in your role as setting yourself up for the future. You might find also, because the 11th house is also a money house tied to the thing that you do, um, or money that you might receive from other people, you might find that there's a limitation there. There's something that's restricted, or there's something that's not happening in a way that used to happen, or there's a feeling of being held back in some way. Build on that, take Saturn's responsible energy and build the new way. And that's really what this is all about. With Mars in the ninth house, you're really focusing the energy of your sense of purpose, your ideology, or your sense of your beliefs and what you have faith in you're channeling it into that Saturn at this point. So think of that as a practice for the next couple of years and make the most of this. And you'll be hearing a lot more about Saturn in Aries for you, Gemini. This is just to really hone it down to the Saturnian brass tacks of what this represents without the extra noise. All right, see you in the next video. Cancer Saturn has just moved into the top of your chart. The 10th house represents your vocation, your career, or whatever it is that you do out in the world. So your social status, am I am I married, not married? Am I employed or not employed? Am I self-employed? All of these different aspects are a, a representation of the 10th house. And the 10th house is your ambitions, your personal ambitions. And it can be confusing when Saturn goes into Aries, especially because it doesn't do so well in Aries. There can be a sense of, is this really my ambition? Is this the thing that I want to do? Testing that out. This is the other aspect of the Saturn in Aries, which is that it'll test a little bit here, a little bit there. There's all kinds of new options, new ways, new ideas that might come in, and then Saturn will say, nope, don't go there, or yep, that's a little bit of what it is, but you could do more. And it'll just continue that way, and it'll keep testing you and testing what works until you figure the new thing out. You might be trying out a new job or new career paths and kind of going a little bit here, a little bit there. When Saturn was going through here in the 60s, because I'm a Cancer moon and ascendant, not in the 60s. I'm born in the 60s. When Saturn was going through here in the 90s, I was in the middle of a real personal turnaround almost in a crisis because I had studied international relations. I had gone through my Saturn return because I have Saturn in air in Pisces, and I was realizing I didn't want to work in the international institutions, which I had set myself up to do, and which I was doing. And so, as Saturn was moving through Aries, that's when I left the institutions. It took me a couple of years. It really was a back and forth of a while, and I had been taking courses in naturopathy and essential oils and reflexology and you name it. And it also was a period of time when I got married. So Saturn rules the seventh and eighth houses, seventh house of relationships, eighth house of committed partnerships and the intimacy that comes through marriage and other people's money. Saturn goes into the 10th house. There can be a new relationship that establishes itself. And indeed, I got married in 1997. And and so that's something that can happen to Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising. You might find your career shifts. You might find your role in society shifts. This can be with reference to your parents. I not only got married, but I also became pregnant with my first child. So I became a parent. She was born 2 weeks after Saturn left Aries. So she was born with 2 degrees of Saturn in Taurus. And so just saying, there's major things happen when Saturn is on the angles. And here we have Saturn, the ruler of your relationship sector, and the eighth house of, by the way, the occult as well, and the taboo houses, eighth house, what you're doing in terms of the mystical, magical stuff of life, astrology, and all those other, or maybe psychological stuff as well. And that goes into the 10th house. Now, I summarized that in a few sentences, but it was not easy. So I had to take responsibility for myself because I was no longer, or as I was shifting through this change, I was no longer employed by these quite lushy contracts, in international institutions. All of a sudden, I had to figure it out on my own. And I was lucky that I had the context of a spouse, a solvent spouse. So you might be in that situation. So this is just the beginning of that. It's showing you, okay, this has to be different. How is it going to be different? Well, that's the period of the next 2+ years where you're testing how things need to be different. And you will make mistakes and you will change your mind and you will go in different directions, but it's showing you this is what needs changing. With reference to parenting, you might become a parent, as I indicated, or you might take on a different responsibility for your own parents, or you might even lose parents because of the condition of Saturn in the 10th. One or another parent might pass on. You then become the patriarch, the matriarch of your family, for example, taking on that ultimate responsibility, especially if this is around your second Saturn return or thereabouts. Um, yeah, so this is a testing period of time, both in both in both ways of the meaning of testing, but meaning trial and error to figure out who am I out in the world, what are my goals, what are my ambitions out in the world, put it down and say, is this a dream? Is this a pipe dream? Is this something I can actually do and take responsibility for? Am I taking responsibility for my role out in the world? And that, of course, is everything I just outlined in my own example. This is where the rubber hits the road, and it's like saying, okay, now I can show up and I can say, I got this. I can be a reference socially. I can be a reference for other people to rely on. I can be the person that other people look to in the context of what I do, or in my parenting role, or in my role as taking care of my parents, for example. That might even involve being the person who has to take care of your spouse for whatever reason. I would have to see your natal chart for that. Right. So it's a big deal to have Saturn moving through the angles. It will be a game changer. It will turn your life in different directions. Doesn't matter if you're retired, this is still going to change how you show up out in the world, how you organize yourself around your personal ambitions, and the things that you want to leave as a legacy, what it is that you want to do and leave as a legacy, whether it be a child or a career thing, or some kind of reputation. Right, so that's that for Cancer, and make the most of this. We will talk much more. Oh, by the way, then the Mars, I didn't mention Mars in the eighth house is about intimacy. It is about that taboo area of life. It is about everything to do with what you share with others financially, etc. And that will be where you put a lot of your energy at this point. So this is the symbolism of the 2+ years that we're moving into. And that can also include real desire for a change of relationship. Is it about needing to get divorced or separated? Is it about needing to get coupled up and married and established with somebody? Whatever that is for you in that eighth house way, it's feeding into the 10th house. Now, this could also be, as I alluded to, it can be the area of life which is about the occult and mystical or even psychological stuff. So that means that that part of the motivation that Mars is showing is going to show up through the 10th house Saturn, right? So that's another way of looking at this. Right, we'll be back for more, no doubt, many, many times to come. And I wish you well, Cancer. Make the most of that. Leo Saturn is trinal to you in the ninth house, where we find Aries for a Leo Sun, Moon, or Rising. Mars is across the way. So there's a lot of action in relationships, or the dynamic around relationship, or potentially the client relationships, or the goals that you have in those areas. Goals around marriage, goals around relating, goals around how you show up with people or how you show up with clients. And that's feeding into this ninth house Saturn, which is really getting you clear on your life purpose. It's a strong indication of what you have faith in this area. It's about yourself. It's Aries. So reconstructing yourself and having faith in yourself. If this has been a tricky time, especially because Pluto has been across the way from you, this is a simplified chart, just so I don't get off in tangents like I usually do. You will be wanting to really check yourself out and give yourself that pat on the back that says, yeah, look what I've accomplished. Look what I've done, especially if you are old enough to be recognizing this longer cycle of 29 years here of Saturn going into Aries. Um, and what has happened in the previous cycle. So go back to the beginning to hear more about that. But you're setting yourself up here for 2+ years of a new way of showing up in terms of your life purpose. Why am I doing what I'm doing? How do I relate to my father, for example? That's also the house of the father. Leo has persistent issues with fathers. That is part of a big Leo signature. And that depends on your natal chart, but it's not always easy because the one Leo identity is found through the father figure. And this is the ninth house of fathers or teachers, gurus, people who are guides, people who counsel, people who take responsibility. Now, maybe that's you, especially if you're at a stage of life, usually after the first Saturn return, where you become that figure. Often before the first Saturn return, there's a lack of credibility, or there's a lack of um, gravitas that can be there, and that shapes up after the first Saturn return. Certainly, if you're well into that, or if you're in your second Saturn return, then this would be about you taking on that mantle of mentor or leader or teacher. That is something that can help others find their way. Or you working in terms of finding your identity, being clear, what am I here for? Why do I get out of bed? How am I relating to those important figures that I consider to be a father type figure or a teacher type figure, etc. And this is a very key part of the Saturn cycle for you. All right, Leo, and it is trinal to you, so very supportive energy, supporting you through this growth period, supporting the change. So the ninth house is the house of what the Indians call bhagya, which means good fortune. So it will bring you really great things, great returns if you put your head down and focus on how you show up in ways that like Saturn appreciates, which is through integrity, through sincerity, through honesty, etc. No shortcuts. All right. So good luck with that, Leo. I will see you in the next video. Virgo, Saturn is in your eighth house of intimacy. It's your psychological, sexual, or emotional intimacy that's coming up. This can mean that you're starting to put down a sense of commitment and durability in the relationship that you might be in, especially if you have been in a relationship that survived Saturn moving through the seventh house and you're now moving with Saturn in the eighth house. It's probably a pretty solid relationship. Of course, there might be some exceptions to that rule, but if you went through Saturn in the seventh, you have done a lot of restructuring around relationships for yourself and the partner you're with, or clients that you're with, for example, or the business partners. And Saturn in the eighth is now about how you structure your funds, how you structure what you share, how you work through dynamics that are what you do with this individual in a more intimate way that other people don't need to know about, let's say. It can also be about overcoming fears or taboos around yourself, perhaps around yourself in terms of your more mystical side or even psychological side. You may have experienced real loss, or you may be experiencing real loss. Somebody might die. Um, or has passed, and you're working through that. So just know that if you've lost somebody or if you've lost employment or something along those lines, it is natural to feel sad. It's natural to grieve. It's natural to feel down. And when you feel that it's going on too long or it's starting to take away your capacity to get through your day-to-day life, then it's time to find help. And there we have Mars in the sixth house in your house of overcoming obstacles, which is beautifully placed for doing that, taking action to improve my health, to improve my everyday life, to improve how I show up every day, to deal with challenges at work or whatever the job situation is or my obligations. And then Saturn in the eighth is also about restructuring yourself from that psychological place. The eighth house is your unconscious, or rather what we could call more the subconscious. It's things that you kind of know are there lurking that you want to talk about, but you haven't found the person to talk about. Well, now you will. This is the place where you say, okay, you know what? I need to look at this. I need to look at how all of that has affected me throughout my life, or especially right now, for example. There may be, as I said, a loss, and therefore there can be some inheritance that comes through here. With Saturn going through the eighth, it can be challenging. It might be that there's something that's supposed to be there and it's not there, or that your spouse loses their job and now you've got one less income to rely on, and you've got to kind of learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. And that's the Saturn in the eighth, where you really have to take your, you know, you have to kind of figure things out on your own, overcoming fears that include maybe financial fears. It can be including, what it is that you are able to connect with in terms of the relationship. Are you going through a fallow period, in your sexual relationship or your intimacy or your emotional bonding, for example? All those things are possible, and I would have to see your chart to know exactly how it's affecting you. But just know that this is what you're working through. Listen to the beginning of the video, ask yourself all those questions, look at all of those things, especially things that have to do with those self-defense mechanisms that might, especially in the eighth house, come to you in a way that you don't realize because it can be buried in the unconscious, where you're not really seeing, you're not really aware that it's happening, but it's happening. So just notice that, all right, and take good care with that. Now, it also means that you and your partner, if there is one, or you with money that you might have already inherited, you are putting it in order with Saturn in the eighth house. You become an extremely good money manager. And that can also be what, you have to become a good money manager because money is tight, but you are figuring it out. And so you're becoming very good at that. Or let's imagine you wanted to become involved in healing work, or especially around psychological work, or whatever healing work, because that sixth house, eighth house connection can put you in that role of, I want to be a surgeon, I want to be a healer, I want to be a psychologist, or whatever. And here now you're ready to study and do the hard work. With Saturn in the eighth house, you put your head down and you say, I need to learn everything about this topic. And it's often linked to the occult, or it can be linked to, like I said, psychological stuff or medical stuff, or it can be taboo things. Like I want to know everything about MK Ultra, mind brainwashing, or whatever, whatever the thing is. So this can also bring you benefits because then once you go through that, you gain expertise here in the eighth house. Right. So good luck with that. Don't look at this as anything necessarily bad. It's going to be something that builds you up as Saturn moves to the top of your chart and you start to use whatever you're acquiring over the next 2+ years. All right. Good luck with that, Virgo. I'll see you in the next video. Libra, Saturn is in your house of relationships. So Saturn does pretty well for you. It's better on your side than on the other side, I have to say, because it's now in its detriment when it's in your seventh house. So there can be something that you really need to sit down and work through in your love life, in your relationships, in your client relationships, in your business partnerships. But it will be necessary and worth doing. And whatever emerges after these 2+ years from that seventh house examination will bring you a lot of what's the word? It will bring you longevity. It will bring you something lasting. It will bring you a relationship that works. No two ways about it because Saturn builds commitment. Saturn is there to say, look, this doesn't work anymore. It may have worked up to a point, now it's not working anymore. You've already gone through quite a lot of shifting in terms of your way of dealing with everyday obstacles or people in your workspace or things that you have to take care of. And now maybe it's this energy of I'm going to lay down the law. I'm no longer picking up your dirty socks. There's the laundry basket. There you go. Or I'm no longer tolerating that from you. So Mars is in your fifth house, trinal to you, and it's ruling that seventh house at the time of the ingress. And that fifth house is really about your self-expression. And I feel this is very much what your next 2+ years is all about. That Mars in the fifth house is saying, you have something to show. You have something that needs to be, expressed in that dynamic Mars way. That can be passion, in terms of creative passion, a love passion, sexual passion, and especially as Saturn is there in the seventh house, it's kind of like, you know what? You're not worth my time. You are worth my time. So now I'm clear about that and I'm taking action. Or I'm going to call that person and I'm going to say, look, it's enough messing around. It's time we met up or whatever. And either way, that Mars in the fifth house is going to recalibrate relationship dynamics for you, how you are in relationships, how you do them. If this is about children, because fifth house can also be about your children or children in general, including if you've if you're a teacher, for example, if you're looking after students, or if you're a sports coach or something like that, that is also part of this Mars, and that will change the dynamic of relationships and the expectations around relationships with reference to your children. Now, with Mars there, it could be that there are a few words that need to be spoken around this, and that there is a need for you to be to show up more firmly, or if your children are showing up in a way that can be unhelpful or bullshit or whatever, you need to rely on that combination of the Mars with Saturn and say, okay, that doesn't work for me. I'm the parent here. You've got Jupiter in your 10th until the end of June, so that is extremely helpful in that sense. And by the way, that's very helpful for the relational dynamics in every case as well. Right. So that, and also fifth house with Mars there in the seventh is potential for meeting somebody special. Mars can be passion and connection in relationship around, especially around males, for females, but not only, but males in general, but a passion partner. This is where you might meet somebody and you might meet them doing the thing that you love. And that can be a hobby or it can be sports. And fifth house is sports as well. It can be your art. It can be your just whatever brings you joy. And you're taking action on that. And you find that partner. And then it's like, wow, they're the real deal. This is the one. So that can also be the case for you. And this will be something that you're working over the next 2+ years. So don't contact me if this doesn't happen on this week while we're just integrating this new start. But it's definitely a new start in your relational sector. So bye for now, Libra, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. Make the most of this. So, Scorpio, your ruler, Mars, is also the ruler of your sixth house, where we find Saturn here. And Saturn is changing your everyday life, changing your relationship to healing, to you, if you are a healer, your role as a healer, or health in general, if that's your own situation. perhaps requiring you to look after someone. Maybe you're requiring yourself to look after yourself, but you might also be needing to take care of a partner, marriage partner, or an elder, um, take care of something around the home or a sibling. For example, Saturn rules the third house of your extended family, your siblings, plus your fourth house of home. There might be a lot of tinkering and work that needs to be done to establish a new home. Mars, your ruler in the fourth house, as this is happening, connecting to the sixth house, could be this thing that says, yeah, I've got a lot of work to get through before I can recalibrate what home means to me. Where do I live? How do I live? Moving, buying an old ruin and fixing it up. That's possible for these next 2.5 years. Now, Mars in your fourth house also can reflect an agitation around your mind or your psychological or emotional nature right now. So take care of that. Be careful that you're aware that you might be feeling extra edgy or that there can be tensions at home, tensions in your lineage, tensions in the homestead, within the family of origin or within the family you've established. And just take care of that. Make sure that you are aware that there can be this punchiness that can be there. But as Mars is your ruler, you'll probably handle it pretty well, or at least as well as your natal chart would suggest. So whatever the condition of your natal Mars is would tell us more. Um, and this can be an opportunity also for you to re-establish a foundation in your life that is based on how you see your everyday life. How do I want to feel every day? Do I want to get out of bed at this time doing this thing and doing that job or doing that particular thing? How do I want to work every day, or how do I want to show up and take care of other people's business or undertakings that I need to engage in? And these are things that will be connecting back to the Mars in the fourth, which says, how do I find happiness? What do I need to be happy? With a Scorpio rising, often you do need to be busy to be happy, also because you can get pretty broody if you're not busy. But the Mars in the fourth suggests that that will happen. There will be a busyness. Or let's say, at the very least, you need to take action. And how you take action might relate back to what I was saying in the beginning of this video. So do listen to that again and make the most of this. So Sun, Moon, and Ascendant in Scorpio. I'll see you in the next video. Sagittarius, Saturn is trinal to you, so that's quite helpful because although it's in the fifth house where there can be this feeling of feeling blocked in terms of your creative expression or your self-expression or love, etc., it also is where you find things can establish over a long period of time. And whatever it is that you're establishing, it's coming from a place of support because Saturn is trinal to you, Sun, Moon, and rising in Sagittarius. It's in your fifth house. Mars is in your third house, which is about communications, knowledge, and practical skills, your gifts and the talents that you use. If you're a creative type, for example, with Saturn in the fifth, it's kind of like, okay, now we're going to get down to business, and I'm going to switch from acrylic to clay, and I'm going to become a sculptor instead of a painter. Or I'm going to start teaching this stuff because I've been, painting enough all these years or singing enough all these years, and now I'm going to teach others. And that's that Saturn in the fifth house. It's about establishing something that will last. It's durable. Establishing something that is based on what you love to do, based on what you are happy doing, what you're good at usually, and you are putting more work into framing it or structuring it. It could be a relationship. It could be that you're meeting somebody, but that at this particular stage, you might meet somebody and they're already married and they're going through a process of separation or divorce. It might be that you're meeting somebody, but they live halfway around the world and you're not sure how you're going to meet up or how you're going to work that out. So that can be the Saturn causing some kind of disruption or delay, or, things just not shaping up immediately in the way that you would have wanted them to, with a love relationship. With children, if there's an issue around children, for those who have them, you might find that your children need more of your support, that they're going through a rough patch, that they need you. This can be something to do with, way how you are setting them up in their lives that will impinge on your life, or just a general sense that your children might need more support. that they're going through a bit of a rough patch, nothing dramatic, but you need to be a little bit more there for them. Or perhaps what they're going through is holding you back in some way or another. Mars is in the third house, ruling that, so it can also be that there's some issue that connects you to your family, extended family, the neighborhood, the place that you live in, how you communicate. So that's also something that you might add in. So Mars in the third house is incredibly skillful, really skillful. It can be a bit bitchy. Be careful of that. It can be gossipy. Be careful of that too. But it is extremely skillful, and it knows how to use the tools of whatever it is that you use your skills for. And that again will feed into that fifth house of self-expression. So just be careful that your self-expression is not a little bit, not too much off the cuff. That can be anyway part of a signature of Sagittarius. And especially because Mars is there now. So be careful of that, because it can disrupt love relationships, that it can disrupt the dynamic with your children, or it can disrupt the dynamic around just feeling happy. So notice the third house also is about the mind. So anything to do with that, things that are going on around your thinking process, know that your thinking process from that third house where Mars is directly impacting how you express yourself and how you feel happy, how you feel the joy of living, which is the Saturn in the fifth house. So definitely listen to the beginning of this video where you had a lot of questions that you can contemplate or things to reflect on in the next 2.5 years that might help you here trying to work your way through all of that. All right, so I will see you many, many times in the videos ahead, and we will talk about this ad nauseum for the next 2+ years, okay? Make the most of this, Sagittarius, and I will see you in the next video. So Capricorn, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, your ruler is Saturn, and that's in the fourth house, and it's an angular house. And as I've said to the other cardinal signs, when you have a major planet in the cardinal sign, like you do here with Saturn in the fourth, you also have Jupiter in the seventh. I didn't mention that, but it is something that will be life-changing. And I'm just focusing here on Saturn because there's going to be more videos to come where we incorporate all the other things. There's too much to do each time talking about all of the things, so I'm just separating things out at this point for my own sanity. And Saturn in the fourth house is very much connected to finding your place, finding your physical home, finding your roots, connecting with your roots, reconnecting with your roots. It's maybe something to do with taking a distance from your family of origin or from your lineage or even the family that you have created. It might be something that is showing up in terms of your kids moving out of the home. Your kids move far away and you don't see them that much. You might feel that there's a sense of not being tied any longer to how you feel, or finding yourself maybe feeling heavier than usual. So be careful not to allow yourself to somber into some kind of depression, or allow yourself to feel dragged down. The Saturn is about restructuring. And what we're looking at here is Mars in your second house of self-worth, which is also ruled by the Saturn, but ruling the fourth house for you. And Mars is your exaltation ruler. So Mars in the second wants you to take action based on whether it's your own self-worth or your values. Maybe it's about money, all of those different things. That's where you find the solution to whatever's going on in the fourth house. Now, this can also be quite literally about buying real estate. There might be something about investing in a property, disinvesting. What's the word? Is it divesting in a property? Going in a new direction where you're downsizing. You're going from a big family home into an apartment, or you're going into one of those wonderful tiny homes. And finding your joy there, finding your place of peace and happiness, because that's what Saturn wants here. Saturn is saying, figure out what makes you happy and act upon it. Figure out what makes you feel safe and secure, and structure it. These are the ways that Saturn is going to be affecting you over the next couple of years. It's working really well for Capricorn because Saturn is your ruler, although it is in fall. the support that Mars is giving you. Pay attention to Mars. Mars, as your exaltation ruler, is always going to be giving you the information of where to put your attention at any given time in terms of setting your next goals or setting your sights for overcoming whatever the thing is that Saturn might feel is restricting you or limiting you through. Um, and that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a lot. And I will be coming back and talking about it. Do listen to the introduction again to get those questions because Saturn going through the fourth, especially if you feel lonely or unsupported, which I doubt because you've got Jupiter in the seventh. So I do think you have support there, but it is something to take as a project, take yourself as a project and say, okay, I'm going to rebuild myself because what you're doing here with Saturn in the fourth house is going to show results about 15 years from now. So whatever Saturn is establishing as a foundation for you now, it is going to show the results half of a Saturn cycle away when Saturn moves into your 10th house. And that will be either relating to your marital status or your social status or career goals, career ambitions. Set yourself up to flourish 15 years from now, and you'll see the results. All right, so make the most of this, Capricorn. I will see you in the next video. Aquarius, Mars is in your first house, along with Pluto and the Sun as it happens, but I'm just for the moment focusing on the Saturn ingress in your third house in Aries, ruled by this Mars in your first house. So you are specifically taking some actions, taking responsibility for the things that you're dealing with as now Saturn moves into this house of choice and willpower and your skills and your abilities and what it is that you're doing with that. And because Mars is ruling from the first house, it's really putting you there, saying, look, you've got stuff you can use. You have skills to use. You have, um, your own inherent talents, or you have talents that you are acquiring and learning. And that includes potentially teaching. Saturn is like the great master, as they say, that can put you in a place of teaching. Saturn is your traditional ruler, and that can be putting yourself in a place of a guide or a teacher, somebody who is orchestrating events around your local space or with your family, with reference to your family. There may be some issue that comes up through the family. There may be some kind of a separation or a distance with the extended family or with siblings that might be potentially somebody moving away, somebody having a crisis or needing to have support, and you have to, jump in, and that's you doing your everyday thing, jumping in with Saturn in the third, causing you to be quite busy, causing you to be quite engaged. Saturn in the third can also represent the mind, and so there can be this feeling of being a little bit held back. With reference to your mind and the state of your mind or the way you communicate, there may be a feeling of, you know what, I feel I'd really like to withdraw. Saturn rules your 12th as well. If that's the case, do it. If it's a conscious choice, do it. Saturn in the third can have you say, you know what, I don't want to show up in my neighborhood. They're a pain in the neck. I don't want to be on that committee anymore, or I don't want to deal with my cousin's stuff anymore, or my whatever. And I actually just want to focus in on doing something more in depth and learning this and that, or teaching this and that. Third house is also internet and being online. So you might be finding yourself working hard to develop an online company. The third house is also exchanges of all kinds. That includes like being in some kind of a business situation. So you might find yourself being super motivated to get started on a business, but you're doing it alone because Saturn is there with Aries. So I'm going it alone. I'm going to do this thing, and just jump in and do that. And you will have Jupiter moving in. Jupiter's in your sixth, and Jupiter will move into your seventh at the beginning of July, and that will provide you support. It'll certainly keep you busy and to perhaps provide you with a business partner or support later on, so that as you start out on your own, you don't necessarily end up on your own. What else is the third house? Yeah, third house can be vehicles. So you might find you'll have a difficulty or that you decide, actually, I don't want to have a car anymore, or I need a new car. I need to downsize my car. I want to take public transport. I want to walk everywhere. Um, so Saturn there in the third house can have you become more realistic or more self-limiting around your method of transport. And it might be that, the only way to stay in a job is like with a 2 hour commute every day. And you say, screw it, I'm going to do my own job now because I don't want to do that commute anymore. Or you say, in fact, the job is worth it, therefore I will do the 2 hour commute, whatever the thing is. The Saturn will clarify that for you. So think in terms of a bigger picture of how you engage with life, how you engage in your life, and especially as Mars is in the first house for you, the ball is in your court, as they say. So it's up to you. You take action. You do the thing, and this is you for symbolically for the next 2+ years, as you are finding that Mars in your house of self, guiding that Saturn, saying, "Look, we're building up on these skills. We're using these skills. We're putting ourselves to work. We are communicating also with integrity. That's another way that this can be seen. I communicate with integrity. I mind my words. Those. What is it that the four agreements, which are all based on Buddhism? So you can also go back to the Eightfold Path of the Buddha. But anyway, just, finding yourself speaking with integrity and choosing with integrity and working with integrity and all those different things. That is also Saturn in the third house, to avoid difficulties. All right, Aquarius, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. I will definitely be back with more. There's a lot to say for Aquarius, especially as you are going to have the eclipse in your house later this week. All right, speak to you soon. Pisces, I'm going to say we because I have a stellium in Pisces and we are so done with Saturn, are we not? So we've got Saturn now in the second house. I'm not sure if that's any better, but at least it's not the first house. And then Mars is ruling from the 12th house. Now, the way I see this is Saturn moving into our house of values, our self-worth, understanding our value. And as I've already said in the annual readings, that Mars is adding to what I was saying there, which is that this is an era where Piscean energy of depth of awareness and compassion and understanding and community and recognizing our interconnected nature. This is the era where we get it and where we start to feel less weird and less out there, and people start to wake up to the energy that Pisces holds so powerfully. And now with Saturn in the second house, there's a feeling of mastering that. Well, I master my self-worth, I master my values, I speak with my sense of my own self-worth. I connect to my self-worth before doing anything or before I agree to anything. This can have an impact on income. Your self-worth is tied to money. It may be about income. There may be something that needs reorganizing around money and resources because the second house is the resources. Don't forget that you, as a Pisces with Aries on the second, you are your own resource. And so you always have a resource to rely on. And where everybody else is chasing money, you're just like, it's just me. This is me. I'm my resource, and I can do things kind of dreamt out of thin air, as it were. This is very much the energy of the moment that we're living in, 26 to 28, 29. These are the years where we're going to notice that energy very strongly. Saturn going through the second house can have you feeling a distance to your family. So, whatever supports you is the second house. So, you might find that you're coming into lean times, or that you have to work harder for the same amount of money, for example, or that whatever support you were getting from your family, it turns out it's you now having to provide that support, or that support is not there so much at this stage. It can be in the second house sense of your self-worth as well, where you realize, okay, I was basing my self-worth on this, that, and the other thing, and now I realize I've been missing the point. I need to look at myself through this. So I go back to the beginning of this video and establish that understanding from the beginning of this video, where you look at your self-worth in that unique way and say, this is what I've accomplished, these are the things that I've done, and these are the things that I want to do going forward. And of course, with the Mars ruling from the 12th house, you're taking a lot of the let's say, the instructions from spirit. You're literally saying, okay, I'm what spirit is showing me, what my unconscious is showing me, what my awareness of what is going on behind the scenes is showing me is what I'm taking action on based on my values and my sense of self-worth in the second house, where Saturn is finally out of the Pisces way. Um, and then that Mars also in the 12th can represent foreign lands. And Mars also rules your ninth house of faraway places and people from faraway places. And so Mars is connecting you perhaps to foreign lands or going abroad or moving abroad potentially or meeting somebody from a foreign land or philosophy from a foreign land, that ninth house way of, oh, this is what I believe in, and this is the teacher I follow, or whatever. And that is the Mars in the 12th that is coming through your deeper understanding of all that. It can be equally a desire to work behind the scenes a little bit more so that your money is coming through that way. You're locking yourself in a closet. That's also another way of looking at the 12th house. The closet of the zodiac is the 12th house. You lock yourself away to write a book, for example, which I'm trying to do. And that Mars ruling the ninth house of publishing, as well as Saturn in the second house of yourself, your self-worth and the values and so on. When you write a book, unless you're famous and you get a mega kind of upfront deposit, you are having to do that on your own time, or you have to reduce time. That is like earnings time to write the book. So that might be one way, but it's an investment. Think of it that way. The second house is very much focused on providing and finding investments, and so that Saturn also can bring you some real results, and especially because your ruler Jupiter, which is not showing up here, but is in the beginning of this video, is in the fifth house for you, which is a very fortunate place in the zodiac, and that can bring you a lot of creative inspiration, creative ideas, especially after your ruler goes direct the 11th of March, which is after the eclipse cycle, which I will be addressing very, very soon. So I think that's it for now, Pisces. Take a good long breather, take a nice break, and I will come back and we'll share more about the next couple of weeks, which are extremely busy, especially for Pisces. But this is an overview of how to think in terms of the next 2+ years with Saturn specifically in Aries, okay? And make the most of that. Thank you for watching, and I really, really appreciate if you're still listening. Or anyway, to you Pisces who might be listening, I do appreciate your comments and your likes, the subscribes. I don't monetize my channel, so I don't even get features like members or hypes or any of those things because that's not how YouTube rolls. So yeah, anything that you offer through your connections, like connecting in the comments section or getting a consultation with me or making a donation, buy me a coffee, this kind of thing, it's all really, really welcome. I so welcome your connections with me here. So thanks for all of that, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.